Welcome, everyone, to Developing Coaching Skills, Why Middle Managers Matter Most. My name is Brian Gottmers. I'm the production director and technical producer for today's session from Bluepoint Leadership Development. Also with me is Joan Peterson, who will be delivering your webinar. Some of you may have met her already. So thank you for joining us. If you haven't had a chance, please pop in the chat where you're calling in from. I think we're kind of spread across North America here with some few people in Canada up in my area. Thanks, everyone. Philadelphia, welcome, Wendy. Yeah, go Eagles. Please feel free to support the Jays if you want in that chat, or LA, depending on who you are. But the right answer is the Jays, just in case you weren't sure. So, all right. So just want to welcome everyone. And we have more people kind of joining us. So, again, thank you so much. If you haven't had a chance, please pop into the chat where you're calling in from today. As well, Joan will be watching the chat as well, so please feel free to use that as part of your participation today. All right, I'm going to pass the microphone over to Joan, and thanks for joining us, everyone. All right, Joan.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brian, and thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And for those of you who have been with us again, welcome back. My name's Joan Peterson. I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Sue Ellen, who will introduce herself in just a moment. A little bit about the organization that we work for. We work for an organization called Bluepoint Leadership Development, where we work with leaders all over the world. And we work with leaders in small groups, in large groups, doing keynote workshops in topics from coach training to emotional intelligence to leading change, communication skills, etc. We also have an executive coaching arm of our organization. For those of you who haven't met me, again, my name's Joan. I've been in the leadership development field for over 3 decades, passionate about the work I do, excited to be able to spend the next bit of time talking about one of my favorite topics, this idea of coaching skills, and how do I build coaching skills amongst middle managers. As I mentioned, I'm joined by my colleague, Sue Ellen. I'm going to ask Sue Ellen to jump in and introduce herself as well.
Thanks so much, Joan. And I am not going to count the number of years I worked in leadership development. Recently joined Bluepoint Leadership, but as many of you might be on this call, I worked internal running leadership development, so working with my leaders and managers in my own organization. So excited to be here today and talk about our middle managers.
Yeah, and again, I'm delighted to have Sue Ellen. She brings a different perspective than I do. I've spent a lot of years on this end working with organizations, and Sue Ellen has spent much of her career inside organizations, so brings that perspective. One of the questions, we'll spend the time really looking at this idea of middle managers and how do we equip middle managers to be better coaches. Before we dive into that, I thought maybe we'd spend a few minutes looking at this idea of strategy. And one of the questions that we get asked quite often is, if I'm looking to help leaders inside my organization with coaching skills, where do I start? Do I start top down or do I start bottom up? And when I say top down, it's do I start sort of at the executive level, then work my way down the organization, or do I start at the middle manager level and work my way up? And of course, I think there are pros and cons to each. And I'd love to get Sue Ellen's perspective on this. I'd also love to get your perspective on this. So my question for you, Sue Ellen, and again, I invite all of you to use the chat pod and weigh in here as well. When we think of the top-down approach, so we start building coaching skills at the executive level, like what do you think of the pros of that? And what do you think of some of the cons of that? And again, others, please chime into the chat pod as well around that question. Sue Ellen?
Sure, and I'll keep my eye on the chat pod as we're going through. And I think the beauty of starting at the top of the organization is that you have role models. All of your leaders in your organization are seeing what good coaching can look like, and they feel it. So definitely some positives there. And it also sort of reinforces this is important. This is how we work together. I think sometimes the challenge is finding the time to get those leaders upskilled. They're busy. We all know that. So how do we get them upskilled quickly in order to make that impact?
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think you're right. I think there are tons of pros around the visibility piece and the role modeling piece and the sponsorship piece. And it's like, how do I get them the time and effort to be trained? Love that folks are chiming in the chat pod as well. So I'd love for you to chime in on some of what you're seeing in the chat pod.
Yeah, sure. Like the idea that they're modeling the way, that makes such a big difference. I'm learning new skills, and I know that my leaders are doing the same thing. Um, you know, a sort of a con here, middle managers increase their skill sets, they become more aware of the ways those above them could improve, right? So if we start at the middle and they were like, oh, this is so cool. And then I look up and I'm like, why isn't he or she doing that? So that's certainly a challenge.
Yeah, and that's so funny. I love that you mentioned that Rebecca. Quite often when we're delivering leader as coach workshops, we hear that. Well, if only my manager was doing more of this. And even you go up to some of the more senior levels, and they say the same thing. I wish my manager was doing some of this. So let's look at the strategy of starting sort of at the supervisor. Let's start at the middle manager level. What are the pros and cons to starting sort of bottom up? And when I say bottom, again, I mean sort of the middle manager level and then building up to the executive level. And again, I'd love for Sue Ellen to weigh in on that. And I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the middle manager has, there's more of them typically than your executive level, and they can have such an impact quickly. And in some organizations, when you're starting some of these initiatives, you might not have the resources to start at the top. So you're trying to do like a sort of test and learn and see what comes out of it. So sometimes that can be helpful. But, you know, we talked a little bit about the cons, like my boss isn't doing this, so why should I be doing this? And then there's some comments here. Yeah, mid-level managers have the staff closest to the work, right? And so have a win there is really important.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting thing to look at, right? Do I start here or do I start here? And of course, it depends on your organization. And can we do both, right? If you really look at what the research tells us that middle managers are key leverage points for the reasons why you're putting in the chat pod. They're closest to the work. They have the greatest leverage point because they have the most interaction. And we also know from some of the work that Gardner has done and ICF has done, we know that they won't be as successful coaching without the executive sponsorship and without the modeling. So if we look at what's ideal is to have both going on at the same time. Ideal is potentially cascading, starting with senior level to get the sponsorship, even if it's not a huge time requirement, and then really investing the coaching time and energy, coach training time and energy in the middle managers. Because we do know they matter most because they're the closest to the business. And if we look at this idea of middle managers, we know that middle managers are the bridge between strategy and execution. They're the connective tissue inside organizations. There's been a ton of research lately on how stretched they are. One of the words that's been used frequently is middle managers are being crushed. I mean, it's such an awful word to hear. And it's true, their span of control is growing. And what we're starting to see is what's expected of them now is that they're expected to do more administrative responsibilities. And so not only do they have a larger span of control, but they have less time to do what middle managers should be doing. And that's leading, it's developing others, it's coaching others. So it's important for us to think about it. What are we expecting of our middle managers? And how do we equip them to be able to coach, lead, develop differently? And I do think, again, McKinsey did some research on the idea of this. There's a direct link between middle managers being equipped to do middle manager things, that is growing and developing others, and financial performance. So if we give them the skills to coach, to engage in meaningful conversations, there's a huge impact on financial performance. We need to be mindful of what else are we expecting them to do. There's a book written on middle managers called Power to the Middle, and that's where this quote comes from. And part of what they talked about in the book, what are some actionable lessons? And one of them is we need to equip leaders at this level to develop talent, to coach, to be of service in terms of coaching and developing others. We can't just expect them to have an administrative role, and we need to reward them for that. So let's talk about, how do I equip them? And for those of you who were with us before, one of the questions that I had asked the last time, and I'll ask it again through a different lens, is when you look at the middle manager inside your organization, how many conversations do you think they have every day? And if you're a middle manager, or if you're somebody that's not in an organization where you know how many middle managers there or how many conversations they would have, I'm going to ask you to think about yourself. How many conversations do you have every day? When I say conversations, it's one-on-one, it's team meetings, it's text messages, it's email messages, it's Slack message or team messages. How many conversations do you think the average middle manager has every day? And I've asked that question of a lot of the leaders that we work with. And I hear anywhere from, don't I have about 10 to hundreds to I have far too many. And if we just stop and think about the volume of conversations we have, too many to count. I mean, I typically hear that 30 plus. North America, what we're seeing in the chat pod is sort of typically what I hear. And then if I ask the leaders this question, and I'll ask you the same question, when you think about all those conversations that you have, percentage-wise, how many of those would you say are meaningful? That is, the other person leaves inspired, engaged, maybe with a piece of feedback, maybe challenged in some way. And again, I'll ask you to think about your own conversations, or put your shoes in the middle managers inside your organization. Percentage-wise, I'll tell you what I typically hear anywhere from fewer than 5% to 50 is probably as high as folks go. 1%, that's pretty average. And I don't think that 100% of our conversations need to be meaningful. I do think that our middle managers are having transactional conversations when we can be helping them to have more transformational conversations. Because if they're the connective tissue, and we believe this, and our belief is this, most leadership happens one conversation at a time. Are we helping them to have conversations that matter? Are we helping them to engage in different kinds of conversations? And one of the things that, again, if you've been with us before, that we've talked about is, what does great coaching look like? And if I were to ask you to think about, what does great coaching look like? So if most leadership happens one conversation at a time, and we want middle managers to have more meaningful conversations, what do we mean by that? And I'll ask you just for a moment to pause and think about, well, what does great coaching look like? When you think about your own personal best coach, somebody who is meaningful for you, who has helped you learn, grow, and develop, what are some of the things that they've done? And this is a question, again, we've asked lots of middle managers all over the world. And here's what we see. And again, I know this isn't a new slide for some of you. I think this is what we see the best coaching middle managers doing. We see them encouraging others. We see them really listening, confronting others, challenging others, caring about others, giving people feedback, seeing something in others they don't see in themselves. I mean, this is what great coaching looks like. And of course, coming on the heels of that is what's not on the list. What's not on the list is they gave me great advice. They told me what to do. They directed me in some way. And I think middle managers need to do that as well. But this is what we talk about, meaningful conversations. They're doing this. So I'm going to ask you, if you would, to take a look at this list. And again, put yourself in the shoes of your organization. Which of these behaviors would you like to see more of by your middle managers? So if I were to pull all the direct reports of your middle managers, which of these would they say they want more of? And I think what's interesting about what comes out of what does great coaching look like is it's two really distinct skill sets. There's a nurturing skill set. They listened to me. They cared about me. They saw something in me I didn't see in myself. And there's a difficult conversation skill set. They told me the truth. They challenged me. They confronted me in some way. So again, I'll invite you to take a look at the list. And which of these do you want more of from your middle managers? I'll also ask you to take a look at the list for yourself. Which of these would the people around you want more of from you? You love a lot about all of the above. Love that, Cheryl. So they listened to me. They invested in me. They encouraged me. They challenged me. So again, I think it's a really nice list to go back and say, what am I not seeing or what am I not doing inside my organization? So so this is what good looks like. I also wonder, and I'm going to ask Sue Ellen to weigh on this as well, like what are we risking if we don't invest time in our middle managers around coaching? So if we're not intentional about equipping middle managers to coach, what are the risks? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I'm loving what I'm seeing in the chat, right? And a lot of it around listening, encouraging. And I think this helps us answer this question, right? If my employees don't feel heard, if my employees don't feel challenged, they're not stretched, they don't take a chance on me, right? Where's the development happening? And if I think about that manager, right? Like if I'm not developing my team, we know how this all goes, right? Then, well, I can't develop, I can't move. Well, we really need you to take care of that because your team isn't ready. And then there's some notes in the chat here, like employee experience, like what does that look like? Or how could it look so different? Attrition, yeah, like they're leaving because they're not developing. We hear that all the time around Gen Z, right? They want development. Coaching, what a great way to do that because you're learning on the job, right? You're being challenged to do more. Employees will seek development elsewhere. Stagnation turns the conversation in strictly transactional, right? And we want to feel cared for as a human being. I just wanted to see if there's other things I'm missing in the chat, or Joan, if you see something that I've missed.
Like the employees feel lost, unimportant, undervalued. Oh. Yeah, your vision can't move forward. I mean, such really good. We know it's important, right? We know that there's a huge risk if we don't invest time in our middle managers because they touch more people in the organization than anyone else. So I would like to share a bit of a couple of thoughts on how do I equip managers, middle managers specifically, to coach. And we'll look at three things. And this is the model that we use when we train leaders to coach. It's our 3C model. We start with character. Have I earned the right to coach? This is around who you are and how do you show up. Connection. This is how am I forming relationships? Am I forming relationships where people want coaching from me? And then the third piece is around conversation. And that I think goes without saying. Like, I think we do need to equip leaders from a skill set perspective. How do we help them have conversations that spark insight and action? I do think that we do a disservice if we only concentrate on the conversation piece. We do need to invest time helping and equipping middle managers to recognize that who we are and how we form relationships is just as important as the conversation itself. Like to spend just a few minutes, and I know the last time we were together, for those of you who joined us for the last webinar, we did talk about character. We did talk about earning the right to coach. And I'll ask you to weigh in on this. Like, what qualities does a person need to earn the right to coach you? And I think this helps us sort of define what does earning the right look like. In order for you to want coaching from someone, what do they need to do, or how do they need to show up? What is it that you're looking for? And Sue Ellen, your thoughts on this? What qualities does a person need to earn the right to coach you?
Oh, it's a little bit of a long list, but I need to feel like, sorry, Joan. I feel like I need to feel like that they're in my corner. They want the best for me, and it's me and the organization, like sort of having that alignment. They have my best interest at heart. And I think that would cover sort of like, Sue Ellen, I got some feedback I need to give you, as well as, hey, Sue Ellen, I know you thought this went not so well, but here's some encouragement.
Yeah, thanks. Wendy, I saw you put in the chat pod respect and trust. Integrity. Demonstrate that they're, that they walk the talk, and the humility. I think for me, vulnerability is important. That trust piece. Oh my gosh, so love what's going in the chat pod. I think we need to help leaders recognize that if they're not showing up like the people that you're talking about in the chat pod about what you need, no one's going to want. You could give them all the skills in the world. If they're not doing what you're putting in the chat pod, people will not accept coaching from them. We do need to be really intentional when we're looking to help middle managers be coach-like, is we need to help them recognize that they need to earn the right to coach by doing all the things you've said there. So here's sort of the question, and I don't know that I have the perfect answer for this, and Sue-Ellen, I'm going to ask you to weigh in. I would love for you all to weigh in the chat pod as well. Like, how do you equip managers to do all the things you've just put in the chat pod? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I'm going to tap into any of my learning and development folks on the call here, because that's a really hard question, Joan. So first of all, really hard question. But we think about emotional intelligence, helping build their self-awareness. Are managers getting the feedbacks they need? And I know there was a comment really early on about sort of the role of the manager. Like, do people know what we expect of them as a manager, right? Is it just focused on that transactional piece, or are they a developer of talent? Are they responsible for coaching, right? Like, is that part of what is expected of them and how they get rewarded and get feedback? And I'm seeing lots of things in here. Mindset is key. Being humble, training for coaching and connectedness, right? Like, some of those conversations are not easy. So how do I equip them with the skills to have those? Thinking, I'm sure you're like psychological safety. How do I create an environment of that? I'm just sort of scrolling through. They're coming through too quickly for me. Provide them with the time necessary, right? So part of it's practice, part of it's, looking at their plate. And I think this goes back to the research you shared earlier, Joan, like what we expect of these managers, it can feel crushing. And so what is it that we really need them to do to be effective and to move the needle forward? And what might be something maybe that they don't need to do? And I think what I've seen in organizations is we have lots of things on our plate, and sometimes it's really challenging to prioritize. And if we could prioritize for our managers, this is the thing, or these are the 3 things where you should be focusing your time and energy. What are their strengths? What do they also really enjoy, right? Like, leading from a place of what your talents are and your strengths can really make an impact as well.
Yeah, love it. Such great suggestions in the chat pod, Sue-Ellen. Thanks for your perspective. I mean, what I'm taking from sort of both the chat pod and what you're saying is, I think emotional intelligence and recognizing the impact I'm having on others matters. How do we help people become more self-aware, whether it's through feedback? Like, if I don't know how I'm impacting others, like, am I even thinking about whether I've earned the right to coach? There needs to be something built in where I recognize how I'm showing up and how I'm showing up with others. Again, so grateful for the interaction from folks. I'd like to switch our conversation transition our conversation to the second C, which is around connection. And this is around forming the relationship of coaching. It's the second C in the model. And again, I'd love for your thoughts on this. What can leaders do to strengthen the connections they have with their team members? What we know about coaching is, if I have a strong connection, that is, I can sit side by side with my team members, they're more open to the coaching conversation. So it's not about me looking to coach you. It's about me extending coaching and you welcoming it, so that we're side by side. It's not something I'm doing to you. It's something we're engaging in together. I think we need to help leaders recognize that the connections they have with their team members matter. This isn't about, I need to hang out with you after work. It is about, regardless of whether I would choose to hang out with you after work or not, what are some of the things that I'm doing to connect with each team member, to being able to see each team member. Love that meaningful connection beyond the surface level. Like, so I know, you talked about, so I know the strengths of others. I know what their values are. I know what their aspirations are. That's how I connect with individuals. Am I able to do that? Yeah, I love it. Showing interest in them, having conversations, building rapport, showing empathy. Such wonderful things in the chat pod. You know, knowing kind of what they're doing, listening to them. One of the I think is interesting around a coaching conversation. You know, are these three things together, and they seem like they're a bit disjointed. But the best coaches inside organizations are able to hold these three things at the same time. Are we able to see people and appreciate them at their best? This isn't about participation trophies. This is about seeing individuals, seeing when they're doing something and then appreciating and affirming them and letting them know it. The second is confronting people. But it's confronting them with their own talents and aspirations. So it's being able to hold the mirror up. And sometimes it's saying, like, do you see what I see? You know, and it's helping people look at themselves in the mirror. And sometimes it's confronting them with their own best. And the third is holding them accountable to live up to that best. And I do think holding these three things together at the same time is not easy. But when you have leaders who are able to do this, what you find is that they will have individuals who want to be in conversation with them, who want to be in coaching conversations with them. And I'll give you an example of what this looks like. When I talk about my personal best coach was my very first boss. So we're going back a lot of years. I worked in a financial services organization. And I was right out of grad school, so I was fairly young. And I was an internal coach. I was an internal consultant. And I had aspirations to work with senior teams. So one of my very first coaching clients was with a very senior leader inside the organization. And I had their 360 feedback, and I had set up some time with them, and I walked up to their office for our first coaching session. So this senior leader met me at the door with sort of arms crossed. And I was new to the organization, had never met me before. And I did look quite young, and pretty much said, you're who HR sent me? Like, I got you, was the exact words. Like, I got you. And then, not appropriately, shared that his children were older than I was and didn't know what I could offer him. So again, not appropriate. And how I responded was even more inappropriate as a coach. I crumbled. I was not a good coach for this individual. Like, I crumbled under the pressure. I fumbled my way through the session, and I got out as quickly as I could. Like, so not proud of that moment. And I went down to my manager, who I loved, and I complained. Like, it was awful, and this is what they said to me, and I can't believe it. And I was victim. So what my manager said to me, and she was able to hold these three things in that conversation at the same time. She said, Joan, we hired you because you're really talented. And then she kind of held the mirror up and said, and I wonder, how did your talent show up in that conversation? Oh, like, it didn't. Like, I was awful in that conversation. And then she said, and I was so angry, and she said, and I wonder what you'll do differently the next time. And I thought to myself, you're sending me back? And I mean, think about what she did. Appreciated me. Like, you're really talented. Like, you're better than that. She didn't say it, but that's kind of was like, oh, I know I'm better than that. And then let's work together to think about how might you show up differently the next time. You said you wanted to work with senior leaders. What are some of the things you might need to do differently? I mean, that's a coaching connection. This conversation happened many years ago. I still go back to that when I hear myself making excuses. Like, oh, I'm the victim. I can hold the mirror up to myself as well, but it takes someone to sort of hold those three things together. Not easy. I also think, when we talk about making a connection, and many of you alluded to this, that being able to listen, having a desire to be heard is so significant inside organizations. Like, people want to be heard. They especially want to be heard by their leaders, by their managers. So if I polled your organization, I'm going to ask you to use the chat pod here, and Sylvan, I'm going to ask you to weigh in here as well. If I polled your organization, percentage-wise, how many people would say that they are truly heard? If just kind of thinking of your organization, percentage-wise, how many of the people inside your organization do you think would say they feel truly heard? And I'll give you just a moment to kind of pop your thoughts into the chat pod. And again, I'll ask Sue Ellen for you to weigh in as well. Yeah, Wendy, thanks for that. Love it, love it. And you all are on the right track. Here's what we know. Yeah, Sue Ellen, love for you to comment on this slide.
It's just like there are employee listening teams that are there in organizations to listen, right? Employee engagement surveys. But when you see this stat, 1 in 4, like that, it hurts my heart a little bit. Like that is really not many, right? And you all shared earlier, like, I would love someone to really listen to me. And I think we probably think we're doing a better job than we are actually doing. And lots of reasons, distractions, pressure, like there's so much going on, and probably worse now than in 10 years ago. But to truly feel heard, we talk about attrition and retention, like that would certainly make a difference. It reminds me of a story where, and I can remember this so clearly, I was sharing some concerns, and honestly, this was not in the workplace, but at home. And I was sharing concerns with my husband, and he was looking at his computer and typing away, and I'm sharing some concerns. And finally I said, "Look, you're not listening." And he looked at me and he said, "No, this is what you said." And he repeated verbatim back to me what I said. And that was a little dismaying, if you will. But then I said, but I still don't feel heard. And I think that's the key, right? You can like repeat back, or you can, this is what I heard you say, but did you really hear it, right? And part of that is on the person that's speaking. Do they feel heard? Which feels a little bit different than just, I've recorded this conversation, if you will.
Yeah, what a great story. And yeah, do people feel heard by us? Are we just listening for the words? And what I think is fascinating, if you look at the percentages in the chat pod, they're lower than 25%, which hurts my heart. And I think, gosh, are we helping leaders at all levels to listen differently, to listen empathetic? Yeah, listening and hearing are two different things. Dawn, I couldn't have said it better. And I think, like, and I know you have access to these slides, like, are we able to help our leaders? Are we able to practice these 5 key practices? One is, what do I need to do to get totally present? You cannot truly listen to anyone and do anything else at the same time. And that goes back to Dawn, your statement there, listening and hearing are 2 different things. In some ways, are we able to let other people know that they're important to us and we're not judging them? Are we able to put ourselves in other people's shoes? Like temporarily, for a moment, what could this be like to be them? Are we able to listen? And I think great coaches listen differently. Great leaders listen differently. They listen for emotions. They listen for values. They listen for disappointments. They listen for inconsistency. They listen for what's not being said. And I think great leaders also invite reflective silence into the conversation. The silence piece sometimes surprises leaders. Like, oh, why would I need silence? Well, I can't truly listen and be thinking about what I'm going to say as soon as someone finishes talking. Am I able to invite time for the person to respond? Am I able to invite time for me to think about what they've just said and respond appropriately? And Sue Ellen and I were talking this morning, and you had an example that I'd love for you to share with the group about sort of listening differently. I'm putting you on the spot now.
No, that's fine. This is a work-related example. I can remember it very clearly. So there was a situation happening at work. I was very frustrated. At this point in my career, it took me a little bit of courage to go to my boss and say, hey, here's my concern. And I had a good relationship with my boss at the time, really respected him. He thought of me as a good performer. So there was none of that going on. And I sort of went to him and I was like, here's my concern. I sort of laid it out. And his response, and I think it goes to this, this third part, about him, who I respect tremendously, not putting himself in my shoes, because his response to my concern was, Sue Ellen, what do you need? How much more do I need to pay you? And I was sort of taken a little bit aback, like, I didn't ask for a raise. This like money's not even going to solve the issue I just brought to you. And I felt really like, does he not understand who I am as a person, right? And so we obviously got through that, but it was just such an interesting response to a situation where I didn't feel heard, didn't feel understood, which is a whole other thing, but like really trying to understand that other person and what their experience is.
Yeah, thanks. And I think quite often when we look at the fourth one about listening for values, and that obviously didn't know what you valued as well. They didn't put themselves in your shoes and didn't know what you value. And I think sometimes, and this isn't against the other person, they were treating you as if they were them, right? My guess is that's what their values were. And I think we do that and we don't even know we're doing it. You know, we don't know what people value. We assume they value the same thing. So we look to motivate them. Like, how do we help our middle managers recognize that everyone on their team is different? They're motivated by different things. And part of it comes from this. So I'm going to ask you, if you would, to use the chat pod one more time for this particular slide. If you look at these 5 things, and this I'm going to ask you to make it about you, which of these do you think which of these are your superpowers? And just put the number down. Could be more than one. Which do you think, yep, I got this. This comes really naturally for me. So for me, number 5 comes probably pretty naturally for me. I tend to have more of a preference for introversion than extroversion. So I'm okay with silence inside a conversation. So that would be the one that I'd put as my superpower. Sue Ellen, which one would you say is yours?
I'm going to say number 3, probably to a fault. If we have any Clifton Strengths fans out there, my number 1 is empathy. Right. I try to do it, and I think I can, but to a fault sometimes.
Yeah, I love that. Here's what I love. Like, I love that you're putting in the chat pod, and I love that almost every number has been represented. I mean, that shows us as a species, right? As people who are interested in this, and our leaders, they are naturally gifted. My guess is if you looked at your middle managers, it's across the board. So it's helping them recognize what their gifts are, and then helping them also recognize where might they need to pay more attention, which is really the next question that I'll ask you. And it's this, like, about which of these do you want to be more intentional about? And for me, it's the first one. I really need to practice being present. Like, I have so many distractions, and people know when we're present with them, and people know when we're not. So which one for you would you say is the one you want to be more intentional about?
I think I'm present. I think sometimes I'm not present. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's that number 1 as well.
Number 1.
And I see lots going into the chat pod. And I've asked this question of probably thousands of leaders. The 2 that come up most frequently as the one I need to be more intentional about are 1 and 5. And I would say in most groups that I'm with, doesn't matter the level and it doesn't matter the industry, 1 and 5 tend to come up most frequently for the leaders that we work with. And again, I see a lot of those in the chat pod as well. So this idea of connection, you know, it's, do I hear people? Can I hold those 3 things that I talked about in my hand at the same time? It's also about mindfulness. And it's kind of a, you know, I don't know that we talk about being mindful inside organizations at all. And Sue Ellen, I'm going to ask you to share your thoughts here. One is, like, if you had to define mindfulness, how would you define it? And I'd love for folks to share their definition in the chat pod as well. And then what are some best practices for mindfulness?
I would say, so for mindfulness, for me, it's really about, like, even if I'm present, like it's a scatterbrain up here. Like, there's 1,000 things going on. Like, how do I push those away? Like, oh, and all of a sudden, like, oh, you know, I got to pick up dry cleaning. Like, how do I push that aside? Practice, still working on that. I think part of it is just being intentional, or if I know I'm going into one of those conversations, how do I sort of calm my mind down so I can be present, knowing I have a little bit of a monkey brain.
Yeah. Yeah. And some lovely things in the chat pod, right? Remaining in the present moment without judgment, undivided attention, the sense of calm. One of our colleagues does this exercise with leaders that she works with when she's talking about mindfulness and coaching. And I'm going to ask you to humor me. She does it for much longer than I'm going to ask you to do. So for the next 15 seconds, I'm going to ask you, so you're going to hear silence on the line, which is so deadly in virtual sessions. So I'm going to just say that out loud. 15 seconds, I'm going to ask you to be like mindful and to think about nothing, to clear your brain for 15 seconds. So I'm going to start the timer now. Okay, that's 15 seconds. How'd you do? Love to hear how you did in the chat pod and so on. I'm going to check in with you as well. And again, it's a question that I ask leaders that I work with. So how'd that go? And you have a few individuals who are like, oh, that was bad. And then you have one or two who are like, I got this. How'd it go, Sue Ellen?
Not great. And I have to say, this is the first time I've done this on camera. So part of me was thinking, what is my face doing as I'm trying to not think about something? And therefore I'm thinking about what my face is doing. So not well, but I'm hoping some other folks did better than I did. Yes, long 15 seconds. Thank you. Yes.
So, and I love that you're putting in some of your suggestions in the chat pod, because this is typically what I'll ask leaders. So what worked? And many of them will, practice mindfulness. They practice meditation. They focus on their breathing. Some of the other, I almost fell asleep. Love that, Shauna. One of the things that I've heard people say as well is when something, because things are going to creep into your brain, it's sort of acknowledge them and shoo them out. So acknowledge and shoo, focus on the breathing. And again, I think it's an interesting exercise. 15 seconds. My colleague asks for leaders to do it for a minute, and then I'm afraid that people will start to sleep. So we're only doing the 15 seconds here. Gratitude sharing. I mean, I love all of the things you're putting in the chat pod. So grateful for that. One of the things that I that we'll share with you, again, this is in the deck, and it's around 7 ways to build a long-term coaching connection. So these are things to keep in mind, meant to be a takeaway. But I do want to talk about the 6 and 7, because I don't think we encourage our middle managers to do these enough. 6 is around recognizing and celebrating every breakthrough and victory, no matter how small. Think about what it would be like if our middle managers paused and celebrated their own victories, set short-term goals for themselves and celebrated those victories. What would it be like if they did that with their team? I mean, what we know about recognition, what we know about appreciation brings energy into the system and productivity goes up. And I don't think we do that enough. And I also think number 7 is extremely important. I know we've talked about empathy. To me, the piece that's important here is recognizing when people have doubt or uncertainty. Like imposter syndrome is running rampant inside organizations. Are we able to help our managers, especially at the middle manager level, recognize it, be empathetic, and coach individuals so that they gain confidence to try and do differently? So again, just a bit of a takeaway here for some of the other things important to that coaching connection. One of the, we know that coaching, it's not just about the process. Let's give people skills to coach. It is about who we are. It is about the relationship we create. And those things make a coaching conversation possible, which bring us to really the last part of equipping managers, and that's the conversation itself. And again, I know this is something that, most of us, this is where we spend our time. How do we get leaders the skill? How do we get them the skills to engage in conversations that matter? We know what it looks like. We've already talked about what it looks like. We need to help leaders not only know what it looks like, we need to give them something that makes that skill easily accessible. We need to give them a process you know, whether it's a grow model or whether it's the flow that we use in the work that we do. Like, you know, first we need to discover, then we need to create. And coaching, part of the coaching conversation is around commitment as well. And can we equip them with some tools? You know, if you've been in the webinars with us before, we have a 60-day coaching questions, which you have access to. We need to get coaching questions in the hands of our leaders so that they can have some help around what it looks like to be curious, so that they can have some help around what else can I do rather than give advice or tell people what to do. So again, you have access to that resource. I love this slide for a number of reasons. I think this slide is a litmus test when I leave a conversation for me to ask myself, did I just have a coaching conversation? So when I leave a conversation, here's what makes a coaching conversation different. The first is around the fact of it being extraordinarily original. I think a good metaphor is fresh tracks for those of you who are skiers. Like, is this a new conversation? Or do we keep kind of dredging down the same trail? If we're dredging down the same trail and we've had this conversation multiple times, same conversation, it's not a coaching conversation. So the second part around candor, that is, do I leave the conversation empty? And here's what that means. I mean, sometimes I think we leave conversations and we're having a conversation in our head as we leave, like, oh, I should have said that. I was afraid to say that. I didn't say that. Coaching conversations will require candor on the part of me as a coach and on the part of the person that I'm coaching, middle manager and team. Like, did they both leave the conversation empty? That is, we say what needs to be said. I think there's another quality of a coaching conversation. It's called uncertainty here. I was talking to a client earlier this morning, and she said, I don't want my leaders to lead the witness. So this is around not leading the witness. This is around us as the middle manager. A coaching conversation is not one where I sort of ask manipulative questions and I direct the conversation. There's also a bit of hopefulness. Like, there's an optimistic bias so that people can do differently and can change. And of course, the great coaching conversation requires courage from both the coach and the person being coached. I do think when we equip leaders, we need to help them think about the coaching conversation with some of these things. I also think what's incredibly important, and for those of you who've been in other webinars, I know you've seen this slide before, I do think we don't just need to equip them with skills, we need to help them understand when to apply those skills. Just because I went to a coaching workshop doesn't mean I need to coach all the time. There are times as a leader when I need to direct, I need to advise, I need to mentor, and I need to coach. Direct, advise, teach, mentor, coach. So I think we need to help leaders recognize, when do I coach? And when do I direct? And when do I advise? And I don't just advise when somebody asks me for advice. Sometimes when people ask me for advice, I need to be coaching. We need to help leaders recognize the difference between those behaviors that are critically important, especially at the middle manager level. And here's what we hear quite often is, I don't have time to coach, you know, especially I'm crushed, like the middle managers are crushed. Well, it's not as expedient. Coaching quite often is a bit of a longer conversation than directing and advising, but it has more impact, not just on others, but on the organization. When I start to coach others, I build their capacity. I enable them to be more capable. One of the slides that I really like, and I like the image on this, when we look at what's my responsibility as a leader, there are times when I need to push. I need to use push behaviors. I tell, I fix, I solve. And there are times where I need to pull. I need to inquire. I need to listen. I need to learn. So I was sharing this slide with a workshop, and one of the participants kind of said, oh, I just had an aha. And they said, you know, when I look at the slide, like, who's doing more of the work? And I hadn't even thought of this. And they're like, that person pushing is working a lot harder than the person that's pulling. And it sort of struck me, like, when we push and direct and advise and we solve all day long, like, we're working really hard. And if we're crushed and we have so little time, can't we build in some of the pulling so that we can build capability of others? And I think another good litmus test for a coaching conversation is, who's working harder, the middle manager or the person they're coaching? And if the middle manager is working harder, my guess is they're not coaching. They're pushing, they're telling, they're fixing, they're solving. So again, I do like the image. I think it's a good reminder for us around we need to do both, and when do we do it, which. Sue Ellen, I'm going to ask you to weigh in here as well, and please use the chat pod for this in addition to that. Like, what types of conversations would managers create more impact if they took a more coach-like approach? So if you look at the average middle manager, like, when should they be coaching? What are opportunities for them to coach?
Okay, so please put things in the chat pod, because my first reaction is like, is in every conversation, and I'll go back to your other fly. Not maybe not everyone's appropriate, right? But like this is back when I was working internally in organizations. The number of times I would hear from managers, they come to my door, they want me to solve the problem, and then they do the same thing. Like, and it was like, well, didn't you just teach them that when they come knock on your door for a problem, that you're going to solve it for them? And I think in some cases that was like an aha, like, oh, I've taught them that. So now I have to unteach, right? I have to, if I ask a question, because I think they know how to do it, so maybe I just sort of need to take that off my plate. So that was one. So around problem solving, and regular one-to-one meetings, right? Is that just become a status meeting, or can you, as the middle manager, ask a question and get them to be thinking about what they could be doing more, what are they excited about? One-to-one development, absolutely. Facing challenges that aren't immediate fixes. It's almost like getting people to, I don't want to say getting people to think, but it's a little bit like, I can't solve all the problems. And that puts a lot of pressure on the middle manager, any manager, right? Yeah. If I have to solve everything, how can I help others solve their own problems?
Yeah. And I think sometimes we need to help them think about, like, all right, other than the one-on-ones and other than when somebody asks for advice, are there other opportunities to coach, right? Around performance, around development, around continuous improvement, around career growth, around stakeholder management. So are we able to help leaders find different opportunities to engage in different conversations? And sometimes I think they need a little help with that. I think part of our how do we build skill is by actually helping them think about the conversations that they're currently having, and could they be having them in a different kind of a way. This isn't about more work. It's about having different kinds of conversations. Again, really grateful for what's showing up in the chat pod. One of the things that I think is really important, and I'm preaching to the choir here, that theory can teach us the why, but only through practice do we truly discover the how. So our responsibility, if we're helping to embed coaching in a middle manager group of individuals, it's how do I help them? How do I inspire them to want to coach? And how do I inspire them and give them opportunity to coach and get practice coaching and get feedback on coaching? So one of the ways, I think, of course, is providing coaching skills workshops. And in that coaching skills workshop, we need to make sure they're practicing coaching. This isn't a role play. I mean, when we talk about practicing coaching skills, it's I need to coach people on real life challenges. I don't need to pretend to be a coach. I need to be myself coaching on real life challenges. So, and during that coaching skills workshop, I think we need to help people recognize not only what does good look like, give them some tools, get them practicing, get them feedback on it, but when do I coach? Then following the workshop, I think really critical. How do I create opportunities for them to apply the learning? Lots of ways we can do that. And one of the ways, and again, if you've been with us before, you've heard us talk about this, that our belief is that if we can get middle managers coaching each other in a coaching circle type format, we can not only get them great coaching, because I find middle managers don't get a lot of coaching, but we can get them practicing coaching. So what is a coaching circle? Here are some best practices of a coaching circle. Typically, if you have a workshop of 25 people, you want to get groups of 8 or 10 or 6, 8, 10 in a smaller group. and you have them coach each other. They bring in real life challenges. They do tag team coaching. They get feedback on their coaching. They get to practice. They get to talk about what they're working on from a coaching perspective. If you want to see what a coaching circle looks like, and we've extended this invitation before, please join us for a complimentary one. The intention, and here are the 2 dates, and here's how you can get invited to those. Here's the intention of these. It gives you an example of what it looks like. You get to participate in one, and you get to meet a group of individuals that you wouldn't have met before. We'd love for you to join us. We've been doing these for a while. We offer a complimentary one every so often. And again, this is how we can start to embed coaching in at the middle manager level, when we have them coaching each other and bringing real life challenges. So they get coaching and they receive coaching. Again, you can see it being demonstrated if that's something that's important to you. Just RSVP by either emailing us and letting us know which of those you're interested in, or by putting your email in the chat pod, and we'll reach out to you and find out which of those you'd be most interested in. We do know this about coaching. We know that great coaching is a journey. I'm an executive coach, and it's a journey for me. I continuously learn about how I can show up differently for my team, and how I can show differently for my family, and how I can learn and grow from others. So grateful that you chose to spend some of your day with Sue Ellen and I. If we can be helpful in any way, my hope is that you reach out to us. Also, our hope is that you join us for the next webinar, where we'll talk about from skill to culture, embedding coaching across your organization. We'll re-emphasize some of the points you heard today, and we'll share some insights around this idea of a coaching culture. Please reach out to us with anything from a question, or if we can help your organization in any way. I think one of the things that I like best about the organization is it's a personal touch kind of an organization. If you reach out, you'll hear back from us. You'll see Sue Ellen's on this slide, I'm on this slide, and my colleague Julie Henry, who leads our client services organization, is on this slide as well. You can reach out to us directly. We'd love to interact with you. From what we offer perspective, I had shared in the beginning about what are some of the things that we can do to be helpful for organizations. We do offer coach training at all levels, at all different timeframes, virtually and in person. We also, our sister organization offers a coaching workshop for HR professionals. We offer coaching cohorts where we build internal coaches inside organizations. And we do have an executive coaching arm of our business, as I mentioned, where we have fabulous coaches who work one-on-one with individuals inside organizations. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Again, these slides are available to you in the resource widget. So you have not only the slide deck, but you have access to those 60 big coaching questions. And if there's anything that we can do to be helpful, please, again, reach out. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of the day.